My name is Evelina Thompson, and at 35 years old, I never thought I would become the villain in my own family story. The affair was supposed to be my escape from a loveless marriage, but it became the dividing line in my sons' lives. Now my oldest boy, Zachary, refuses to accept my new husband, Derek, and treats his stepbrothers like intruders. After I missed his asthma attack to attend James's basketball championship, Zachary started turning his little brother against me. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more real stories. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin where family values were everything. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and divorce was still whispered about. My parents had been married for 40 years, and I always thought I'd follow in their footsteps with a lifetime commitment. I met Michael during my junior year of college. He was studying business, already had a 5-year plan, and could make me laugh like no one else. His ambition was magnetic. While other guys were focused on weekend parties, Michael was landing internships and mapping out his career. I fell hard and fast. We had what people called a whirlwind romance. 6 months of dating, a proposal at graduation, and a wedding 3 months later. I was 22, starry-eyed, and convinced I had found my forever. My parents worried we were rushing, but when you're young and in love, caution sounds like doubt. The early years were good. Michael landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm, and I finished my teaching degree. We bought our first small house, planted a garden, and talked about starting a family. I got pregnant with Zachary when we had been married just over a year. The moment I held Zachary in my arms, something shifted in me. This tiny human with his father's dark hair and my green eyes became my entire world. Michael seemed happy, too proudly showing off pictures of his son to colleagues and clients. But as Zachary grew from infant to toddler, I noticed changes in Michael. His consulting position required more travel. At first, it was just overnight trips to Chicago or Indianapolis, then week-long conferences in New York or San Francisco. The promotion he received when Zachary was 3 meant international travel. Our conversations became logistics about who would pick up Zachary from daycare or whether I needed to hire a sitter for Michael's business dinners. The emotional connection that had been so strong during our courtship faded like a photograph left in the sun too long. When Zachary was 5, he developed asthma after a particularly bad case of bronchitis. The first time he had an attack, the terror I felt watching my little boy struggle to breathe is something I can never forget. Michael was in London. I called him from the emergency room, and while he sounded concerned, he didn't cut his trip short. I learned to manage Zachary's condition. I memorized his medication schedule, identified his triggers, and kept inhalers in every room of the house. Michael would ask how Zachary was doing, but he didn't attend the doctor's appointments or learn how to recognize the early signs of an attack. That became my domain, along with school projects, parent-teacher conferences, and bedtime stories. Despite the growing distance in my marriage, I convinced myself we should have another child. Maybe a baby would bring Michael home more. Maybe it would remind him of what was important. Looking back, I recognize how naive that thinking was. Andrew was born when Zachary was 6. Michael was present for the birth, but took calls in the hospital room and returned to work 3 days later. The pattern continued, but now with 2 children depending almost entirely on me. Zachary and I developed an especially close relationship during this time. He became my little helper with Andrew, and I was his primary support through asthma attacks and school anxieties. He would wait up for me on nights when I put Andrew to bed just so we could have special Mom and Zach time reading together. Meanwhile, Michael missed Zachary's 8th birthday because of a client emergency. He skipped the elementary school play where Zachary had his first speaking role. He forgot to call on the night Andrew took his first steps. Each absence was another brick in the wall forming between us. By the time Zachary was 10 and Andrew was 4, Michael and I barely spoke beyond household coordination. We slept in the same bed, but might as well have been in different time zones. I suggested counseling, but Michael insisted he was doing what was necessary to provide for our family. The irony was that we had financial security, but an emotional bankruptcy. I found myself envying friends who had partners who showed up who were present not just physically, but emotionally. I began to wonder if this hollow marriage was all I would ever have. And then I took a part-time job at a local publishing company to give myself something beyond motherhood and a failing marriage. That was where I met Derek. Derek Sullivan was the new marketing director at Jensen Publishing. Our first interaction was completely professional. He needed information about the educational market for a new textbook series, and my background in teaching made me a valuable resource. We started with meetings that were strictly about work. He asked smart questions and actually listened to my answers. It had been so long since someone had been genuinely interested in my thoughts that I found myself looking forward to our meetings. The shift from professional to personal happened so gradually that I didn't recognize the danger signs. Derek mentioned being divorced with 2 teenage sons. I shared a funny story about Zachary. He recommended a book he'd enjoyed. I suggested a local restaurant with great lunch specials. 3 months after we first met, Derek asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work to discuss a project. The coffee shop was closing, so we moved to a nearby restaurant for dinner. I texted Michael that I was working late. He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. No questions, no miss you, nothing to indicate he cared about my whereabouts. The conversation with Derek flowed effortlessly from work to books to childhood memories. When I realized 3 hours had passed, guilt washed over me. Not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because I had enjoyed someone else's company more than I had enjoyed anyone's in years. I tried to create distance after that night. I made excuses to avoid one-on-one meetings. I declined lunch invitations. But Derek had awakened something in me that I had forgotten existed, the feeling of being seen, of mattering to someone. The emotional affair started before I recognized it. Text messages about work became text messages about life. Professional admiration became personal appreciation. And all the while, I told myself we were just friends, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. 6 months after we met, Derek and I were working late on a deadline. Everyone else had gone home. When he touched my hand across the conference table, I didn't pull away. When he told me he couldn't stop thinking about me, I admitted the same. And when he kissed me, I kissed him back with a hunger that had been dormant for years. The physical affair lasted 2 months of secret meetings and elaborate lies. I became someone I didn't recognize, checking my phone constantly, creating fictional work events, taking hour-long showers to wash away Derek's cologne before going home. I tried to end it twice. The first time I managed 3 days of no contact before responding to his texts. The second time lasted a week before I found myself parked outside his apartment, telling myself I just needed closure. Each time I was with Derek, I felt alive again. Each time I went home, the weight of my deception made it hard to look my children in the eyes, especially Zachary. At 14, he was perceptive and had started asking if everything was okay between me and his dad. My double life imploded on an ordinary Tuesday. I had been careless, leaving my phone unlocked while I made dinner. Michael rarely showed interest in my activities, but that evening, he picked up my phone when a text message notification appeared. Miss your touch already. Can't wait until Friday. Michael was silent as he scrolled through weeks of messages between Derek and me. I stood frozen at the stove, watching my marriage and family life disintegrate before my eyes. The fight that followed was explosive in its intensity, yet eerily quiet to avoid waking the boys. But Zachary wasn't asleep. Later, I learned he had heard everything: my admission of the affair, Michael's rage, my tearful explanation about loneliness and disconnection. Michael packed a bag that night and went to a hotel. Zachary refused to come out of his room when I knocked. Only Andrew, too young to fully understand, offered me a hug when I checked on him. The next morning, Michael returned to collect more belongings and informed me he'd be filing for divorce. Zachary came downstairs only after his father arrived, standing silently beside him in a clear declaration of loyalty. When I tried to explain that adult relationships were complicated, Zachary cut me off with one word that sliced through me: cheater. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyer meetings, housing arrangements, and attempts to maintain normalcy for the boys. Michael moved into an apartment downtown and filed for joint custody. I stayed in our family home, but felt like a stranger there. I tried age-appropriate explanations with both boys. For Andrew, I said that sometimes grown-ups decide they can't live together anymore, but both parents would always love him. For Zachary, I attempted more nuance, explaining that marriage problems had existed long before Derek, that people sometimes grow apart. Zachary wasn't interested in context or explanations. "You broke our family," he said during one particularly painful conversation. "Dad might work a lot, but at least he didn't lie and cheat." The divorce proceedings were contentious, with Michael leveraging my affair for favorable terms. I didn't fight too hard, my guilt making me agreeable to most demands. What I did fight for was keeping the boys in their childhood home, maintaining their school and friend connections. Throughout this period, Derek was supportive but respectful of my need to focus on my children. We continued seeing each other, though less frequently. Sometimes I wondered if a relationship born from deception could ever truly thrive, but I clung to the connection that had awakened me from years of emotional slumber. After the divorce was finalized, Derek and I began dating openly. I was nervous about introducing him to my sons, especially Zachary, but I knew it had to happen eventually. I waited 3 months, arranging a casual lunch at a restaurant Zachary and Andrew both liked. Andrew, 10 and adaptable, was politely curious about Derek. Zachary, 16 and seething, refused to speak directly to Derek, answering my questions with single words and checking his phone ostentatiously throughout the meal. That first meeting set the tone for what followed. When I mentioned that Derek had 2 sons of his own, Andrew perked up with interest. Zachary scoffed audibly. James and Tyler were 16 and 14, close in age to my boys. James was a basketball star at his high school, outgoing and confident. Tyler was quieter, a computer enthusiast with a dry sense of humor. I met them at a similar restaurant meeting, finding them cautious but polite. The first attempt at bringing all 4 boys together was a disaster. We chose a neutral activity in afternoon at a local arcade, followed by pizza. Andrew gravitated toward Tyler, impressed by his gaming skills. Zachary stood apart, refusing to participate in group activities and texting furiously, presumably to his father. When James tried to include Zachary in a basketball game, Zachary responded with, "I don't need fake brothers, thanks." The comment hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence that persisted through dinner. Despite the rocky start, Derek and I continued our relationship. 6 months after my divorce, he started spending nights at my house when the boys were with Michael. 9 months in, we began discussing living arrangements. "The boys need stability," I argued one night as we lay in bed. "Moving them from their home would be another disruption." "My lease is up in 2 months, Derek replied. "James and Tyler are settled in their schools too. What if I move in here on a trial basis, just weekends at first, then we can reassess?" I agreed to the compromise, hopeful that gradual integration would be easier on everyone. I underestimated Zachary's resistance. When I announced the plan to my sons, Andrew shrugged and asked if Tyler would bring his gaming console. Zachary stood up from the dinner table and said, "So you're moving your affair partner into our home now. Classy, Mom." The first weekend, Derek stayed over Zachary, locked himself in his room. The second weekend, he asked to go to a friend's house. By the third, he had established a pattern of avoiding home whenever Derek was present. After 2 months of weekend stays, Derek moved in permanently, bringing James and Tyler with him. The transition required adjustments for everyone. The boys had to share bedrooms, Andrew with Tyler, Zachary with James, an arrangement that only increased Zachary's resentment. Household routines collided. Derek and his sons were night owls. My family had early bedtimes. Derek was relaxed about chores. I had a strict schedule. Derek allowed junk food. I monitored sugar intake because it could trigger Zachary's asthma. 6 months into our blended family experiment, Derek proposed. It wasn't a surprise we'd been discussing marriage, but the timing coincided with a particularly tense period in the household. "I don't need to be at your wedding," Zachary said when I told the boys. "He isn't my family, and he never will be." I cried that night, torn between my love for Derek and the pain of Zachary's rejection. Derek held me, assuring me that time would heal the wounds. "He just needs to see that this is a permanent change, that we're all family now." We had a small ceremony at the courthouse attended by Derek's sons, Andrew, and a few close friends. Michael's absence was expected. Zachary's absence was a throbbing ache throughout the day. Our first summer as a married family included a week-long trip to a lake house. I hoped the neutral territory would foster connections. Instead, it highlighted our divisions. Zachary refused to participate in family activities, staying on the periphery with headphones and a permanent scowl. When Derek tried to teach all the boys to water ski, Zachary walked back to the cabin. When I arranged a family photo, Zachary positioned himself at the far edge, making it easy to crop himself out. The most painful moment came during a board game night. Derek made a joke about being Zachary's new dad, and Zachary exploded. "You will never be my father," he shouted, flipping the game board. "You broke up my real family. You're just the guy my mom cheated with." He stormed out and called Michael to pick him up. Michael arrived 2 hours later, glaring at me as Zachary threw his belongings into a duffel bag. "This isn't helpful, Michael," I said as they prepared to leave. "What's not helpful is forcing our son to play house with your affair partner," he replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. After that incident, Michael became increasingly involved in undermining our blended family efforts. He bought Zachary expensive gifts, permitted activities I would never allow, and generally positioned himself as the good parent, while I was cast as the villain who destroyed the family. Zachary began requesting more time at his father's house. During his required stays with me, he made his displeasure known through pointed comments about Derek and his sons. "Funny how James's basketball games are mandatory family events, but my debate tournaments aren't worth mentioning," he noted after I put James's championship game on the family calendar. "Tyler gets the new computer for his birthday, but I had to save my own money for a phone," he commented, though the situations weren't comparable. Every attempt I made to create new family traditions was met with resistance. Our Sunday movie nights featured Zachary sitting apart, headphones on. Holiday celebrations became exercises in managing tension rather than enjoying togetherness. Despite Derek's patience, I could see the strain affecting him too. "I don't know how to reach him," he confessed one night. "He's determined to hate me." "Just keep trying," I encouraged, though my own hope was fading. "He needs to see that you're not going anywhere." Neither of us realized then how a single day would soon shatter even the fragile peace we'd managed to maintain. The day that changed everything was the state basketball championship. James had led his team to the finals for the first time in the school's history, and the game was the culmination of years of hard work for him. That morning was hectic as we prepared to attend. Derek was especially excited, having coached James since elementary school. I was making breakfast when Zachary came downstairs, wheezing slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked, immediately alert to the sound. "Just a little tight-chested," he said, reaching for his inhaler. "Probably the weather change." I watched him take a puff, noting that his breathing improved. "Do you need a second dose?" He shook his head. "It's fine. Just the usual spring allergies." At 16, Zachary had been managing his asthma independently for years. He knew his triggers, carried his medication, and was generally responsible about his condition. I made a mental note to check on him before we left, but got distracted when Tyler spilled orange juice all over his tournament shirt. As we prepared to leave, Zachary was in the living room playing video games, breathing normally. Andrew was staying with a friend whose mother had agreed to bring him to the game later. "We're heading out," I told Zachary. "The game starts at 2. You sure you're okay?" "I'm not coming to his game," Zachary replied without looking up from his screen. "And I'm fine." I sighed, having expected this response. "Please keep your phone on in case we need to reach you. There's lunch in the fridge." Zachary gave a dismissive wave. I hesitated at the door, wondering if I should insist he come along or stay home with him. But at 16, he was old enough to stay home alone, and forcing him to attend would only create tension on James's big day. The championship game was everything James had hoped for. The stadium was packed, the energy electric. James played brilliantly, scoring 28 points and making the game-winning shot in the final seconds. The crowd erupted and the team hoisted James onto their shoulders. During the second quarter, I felt my phone vibrating repeatedly in my purse, but was caught up in the excitement of the game. At halftime, I checked and saw 3 missed calls from Zachary. I stepped into the hallway to call him back, but there was no answer. I sent a text, "Everything okay? Call me back." No response came. I was about to try again when I ran into Andrew's friend's mother, who had just arrived. "Where's Andrew?" I asked, not seeing him with her. "Oh, he called and said he'd come with his dad instead. I assumed you knew." Confused, I called Michael, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent another text to Zachary asking about Andrew, but got no response there either. By then, the third quarter was starting, and James looked to the stands to make sure we were watching. I pushed down my concern, telling myself that Michael had probably decided to bring both boys to the game as a surprise, or that Zachary was simply ignoring my texts to annoy me. When James' winning shot went through the net, the celebration was deafening. Derek was jumping up and down, tears in his eyes, as his son achieved his dream. In that moment of pure joy, I turned my phone off completely, not wanting anything to distract from this milestone. The awards ceremony and team celebration lasted another 2 hours. James was named tournament MVP, and the pride on Derek's face made my heart swell. This was what family was about, being present for these significant moments. It was nearly 7 when we finally headed home, stopping for a celebratory dinner at James' favorite restaurant. Tyler had taken dozens of photos and videos, and we relived the game highlights over burgers and milkshakes. We were laughing about the coach's expression when James made his winning shot as we turned onto our street. The laughter died instantly when we saw the ambulance in our driveway, its lights still flashing. My heart dropped. I was out of the car before Derek had fully stopped running toward the house, where 2 paramedics were wheeling a stretcher toward the ambulance. On it was Zachary, an oxygen mask covering his face. Andrew stood on the front lawn, tears streaming down his face. Michael had his arm around him, his expression a mixture of fury and concern. "What happened?" I gasped, reaching for Zachary's hand as the paramedics paused. Michael stepped between us. "What happened is that our son had a severe asthma attack and couldn't reach you. Thank God Andrew called me when he couldn't get through to you." I looked at Zachary, whose eyes were red-rimmed and fearful above the oxygen mask. When our eyes met, he turned his head away. "His O2 is still low," one paramedic said. "We need to move now." "I'll ride with him," Michael said, climbing into the ambulance without waiting for my response. I stood frozen as they closed the doors and pulled away, sirens wailing. Derek came up behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder that I immediately shrugged off. "Andrew, what happened?" I asked, kneeling in front of my younger son. His voice was shaky. "I came home early because Sam's mom had a headache. Zach couldn't breathe good. He tried calling you lots of times. I tried too. Then he started turning kind of blue, so I called Dad." The realization of what had occurred hit me with physical force. While I was celebrating with my new family, my son had been fighting to breathe, unable to reach me because I'd turned off my phone. "I need to get to the hospital," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Derek nodded. "It'll take you. Boys, you stay here." The 20-minute drive to the hospital was silent, except for my quiet sobs. Derek tried once to say it wasn't my fault, but I cut him off. "Don't! Just don't!" At the hospital, I found Michael in the emergency waiting room. Before I could speak, he launched into a furious whisper. "They said if Andrew had waited even 10 more minutes to call me, Zachary could have suffered brain damage from oxygen deprivation." "Where the hell were you?" "The basketball championship." I said the words, sounding hollow and inadequate. "I tried calling him back at halftime." "And then you turned your phone off," Michael said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Your son's been trying to tell you for months that you abandoned him for your new family. Guess he finally got the proof." A doctor interrupted before I could respond. Zachary was stabilized, but would need to stay overnight for observation. His attack had been triggered by spring pollen combined with stress, and had escalated quickly because his rescue inhaler was nearly empty, something I would have noticed if I had been more attentive. "Can I see him?" I asked. The doctor hesitated. "He specifically asked not to see you right now. Maybe give him some time to rest." Those words cut deeper than Michael's accusations. My son was refusing to see me. My son had nearly died while I celebrated with my stepson. I sat in the waiting room all night, though Michael told me repeatedly to leave. Derek brought me coffee and a change of clothes, but I barely acknowledged him. The guilt was all-consuming, a physical ache that made it hard to breathe, a cruel irony given what Zachary had experienced. In the morning, when Zachary was being discharged, he finally allowed me into his room. He looked small in the hospital bed, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "I'm so sorry." I began, tears flowing freely. "I should have answered. I should have checked on you again before leaving." Zachary looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, but something worse, resignation. "You replaced us with them," he said quietly. "Just admit it." "No, Zachary, I would never." "You already did," he interrupted. "You chose your new husband, your new sons. Yesterday just proved what I already knew." He turned away, ending the conversation. The ride home was silent, heavy with unspoken accusations. And in that silence, I realized that whatever damage had been done to our relationship before, it had just become infinitely worse. News of the asthma incident spread quickly through our extended family network. My mother called her disappointment evident in her carefully measured tone. "Evelina, how could you not answer when Zachary called?" "It was loud at the game, Mom. I tried calling back." "And then you turned your phone off," she said, echoing Michael's words. "That boy has asthma. You've always known he needs to reach you." Similar calls came from my sister, my aunt, even my cousin, who I'd been close with since childhood. Each conversation reinforced my failure, picked at the wound of my guilt. At home, the atmosphere was unbearably tense. Zachary refused to eat meals with the family, taking food to his room, or waiting until we had finished to enter the kitchen. When forced to be in the same room as Derek or his sons, he maintained a cold silence broken only by the minimum required responses. Derek tried to mediate one evening approaching Zachary as he worked on homework at the dining room table. "I know you're angry," Derek said, his tone gentle. "But your mom loves you very much. What happened was a terrible accident." Zachary looked up, his expression flat. "An accident is something unintentional. She made choices. First to cheat with you, then to bring you into our house, and finally to ignore me when I needed her because she was too busy with your son." Derek flushed. "That's not fair, Zachary. Nobody could have predicted your asthma would get that bad, and—" "Save the stepdad lecture," Zachary cut in. You don't get to have an opinion on my relationship with my mother. I intervened then, but the damage was done. Derek withdrew from attempting to connect with Zachary, focusing instead on making sure James and Tyler didn't feel responsible for the tension. Meanwhile, Andrew was caught in an impossible position. At 10, he adored his older brother, but also wanted peace in the household. Zachary began pulling Andrew aside for private conversations, often followed by Andrew becoming more distant with Derek and his sons. I overheard one such conversation outside Andrew's bedroom. "They aren't our real family," Zachary was saying. "We had a family before Mom decided to blow it up." "But Derek is nice to me." Andrew's voice was small. "He's trying to replace Dad. And those guys aren't our brothers. Don't forget that." The creation of an us versus them mentality was subtle but unmistakable. When Andrew had previously enjoyed playing video games with Tyler, he now declined invitations. When he'd been excited about fishing with Derek, he suddenly remembered prior commitments. Thanksgiving arrived, our first major holiday since the asthma incident. I spent days preparing, hoping good food and family traditions might ease the tension. I made Zachary's favorite pumpkin cheesecake and Andrew's preferred mashed potato recipe. The meal began awkwardly but civilly. Then James mentioned his college basketball prospects, and Derek beamed with pride. "3 schools already scouting him," Derek said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "All that hard work paying off." "Remember that time Mom missed my debate finals for James' basketball game?" Zachary interjected. "Oh, wait, that was every time." "Zachary," I warned. "What I'm just noting your priorities. James gets championship celebrations. I get ambulance rides alone." Derek set down his fork. "That's enough. Your mother has been trying for months to make this family work, and you fought her every step." "This isn't a family," Zachary shot back. "It's the result of an affair that destroyed my actual family." James and Tyler stared at their plates, visibly uncomfortable. Andrew looked close to tears. "Perhaps you should be excused," Derek said, his patience clearly worn thin. "Gladly." Zachary stood his chair, scraping loudly. "Andrew, you coming?" Andrew looked uncertainly between me and Zachary. "Andrew stays," I said firmly. "This is family dinner." "Right," Zachary scoffed. "Your new family, got it." He stormed out, and the remaining meal was picked at in uncomfortable silence. Later, I found Andrew crying in his room. "Why can't everyone just get along?" he asked as I held him. I had no answer that wouldn't sound like taking sides. The tension at home spilled into other areas. Derek and I began arguing about how to handle Zachary. Derek felt I was letting guilt make me too permissive. I felt he didn't understand the depth of Zachary's pain. "He can't keep treating everyone like this," Derek insisted after Zachary made a cutting remark to Tyler. "There have to be consequences." "He's hurting," I defended. "He feels replaced." "And how long do we all have to pay for your affair?" Derek asked immediately, looking regretful. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." But the question lingered between us. How long would my past mistakes define our present? Then Michael requested a custody modification, citing the asthma incident as evidence of maternal neglect. His lawyer sent a formal letter detailing the event and suggesting I was prioritizing her new family over her biological children. The temporary custody arrangement gave Michael the boys on weekdays, with me having weekend visitation, the reverse of our previous arrangement. The first weekend after the change, Zachary refused to come to my house, saying he was staying with a friend instead. I found myself living in a house full of people, but feeling increasingly alone. The stepfamily I had hoped to build was fracturing under the weight of resentment and unresolved pain. Derek and I were sleeping in the same bed, but growing apart as the stress took its toll. "Maybe family therapy," I suggested one night, clutching at solutions. We tried. The therapist was experienced with blended families, but Zachary refused to engage, staring silently at the wall or giving one-word answers. After 3 unproductive sessions, even the therapist suggested individual counseling might be more beneficial. As months passed, I felt my relationships with both my sons slipping away. Andrew, once my affectionate little shadow, now seemed guarded around me, measuring his words. Zachary had reduced communication to essential information only. I was losing them, and I didn't know how to stop it. 6 months after the asthma incident, the fragile equilibrium we had established shattered completely. Zachary, who had been maintaining minimal contact during required visitations, stopped responding to my texts and calls entirely. When I called Michael to verify Zachary was with him, his response was clipped. "He's decided he doesn't want contact right now. I'm supporting his choice to establish boundaries." "He's 16, I protested. "He doesn't get to decide to cut his mother out of his life." "He feels unsafe with you, Evelina. After what happened, can you blame him?" The word unsafe knocked the air from my lungs. My son felt unsafe with me, the person who had nursed him through countless childhood illnesses, who had been his primary caregiver since birth. I focused my attention on Andrew, determined not to lose my connection with both children. But I noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He became less talkative during his weekends with me, more withdrawn. He started forgetting his favorite toys at Michael's house, no longer bringing pieces of his life to my home. One weekend, I came to pick Andrew up from school, and he seemed surprised. "Is it Friday already?" he asked, his backpack clutched tightly. "Yes, honey. Weekend with me, remember?" He nodded but didn't smile. In the car, he was unusually quiet. "Everything okay, buddy?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Zach says you forgot my band concert was Tuesday." My heart sank. I had asked Michael to swap days so I could attend, but he had refused. "I didn't forget. Dad and I couldn't work out the schedule change. Zach said you didn't really try. He said if it was Tyler's computer club, you'd have come." The comment revealed something important. Zachary was actively shaping Andrew's perception of events, presenting interpretations that cast me in the worst light. The next day, I was folding laundry outside the boys' room when I overheard a phone conversation between Andrew and Zachary. "I miss you," Andrew was saying. "When are you coming to Mom's?" A pause as Zachary replied. "But she seems really sad," Andrew said. "I think she misses us." Another pause. "She does too, love us," Andrew protested, his voice smaller. "She just, I don't know." I moved closer to the door. "She loves them more, that's not true," Andrew said, but he sounded uncertain. I pushed the door open. "Andrew, who's on the phone?" He startled, eyes wide. "Nobody," he said, hanging up quickly. "Was that Zachary? What was he saying about me?" Andrew looked down. "Just stuff." "What kind of stuff?" That you don't love us anymore. That you only care about Derek and James and Tyler now." The words felt like physical blows. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know that's not true, right? I love you and Zachary more than anything in this world." Andrew's eyes filled with tears. "Then why did you let Zach almost die while you were at James' game?" The question revealed the narrative that had been constructed around the asthma incident, not an unfortunate accident, but a deliberate choice that demonstrated where my loyalties lay. That evening, I called Zachary, determined to address the situation. To my surprise, he answered. "Stop telling Andrew I don't love you both," I said immediately. "You're manipulating him with half-truths and making him confused and upset." "I'm telling him the reality you don't want to admit," Zachary replied coldly. "You chose Derek and his kids over us. The sooner Andrew accepts it, the less it'll hurt him in the long run. That's not what happened, and you know it. I made a mistake during your asthma attack. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But it wasn't a choice between you and James. Wasn't it because from where I stand, every choice you've made since you started cheating has been about what you want, not what's best for me and Andrew. I took a deep breath. This has to stop. You're turning Andrew against me, and it's not fair to him. He's 10 years old. He shouldn't be in the middle of this. He wouldn't be in the middle of anything if you hadn't blown up our family, Zachary replied. I'm just telling him the truth. After that conversation, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Andrew began resisting visits claiming stomach aches or school projects that required him to stay at his dad's. When he did come, he was withdrawn and anxious, checking his phone constantly for texts from Zachary. Michael became increasingly resistant to accommodating schedule changes, even for important events. I missed Andrew's school play when the teacher switched the date, and Michael refused to swap weekends. Each missed moment became another piece of evidence in the case against me. One night, after another difficult weekend where Andrew had barely spoken to me, I broke down. Derek found me sitting on the kitchen floor at midnight, sobbing uncontrollably. I can't do this anymore, I cried as he held me. I'm losing them both. Zachary hates me, and he's turning Andrew against me too. Derek looked exhausted. Maybe we need some space from the constant conflict. It's affecting everyone, including James and Tyler. What are you saying? Just that maybe we need to step back and reassess. This isn't working, Evelina. Not for anyone. The suggestion that Derek was considering a separation added another layer to my despair. My attempt to find happiness was unraveling on all fronts. 2 days later, Derek moved into a hotel, saying we both needed time to think. I was alone in the house when I received a call from the school counselor. Zachary had expressed concerns about returning to my house, claiming he didn't feel physically safe there. He mentioned the asthma incident, the counselor said carefully, and suggested there might be neglect issues. That's not true, I gasped. I made one horrible mistake, but I've never neglected my children. But the accusation had been made, and Child Protective Services opened an investigation. I sat in my living room answering questions about my parenting, my marriage, my affair, all while feeling my life crumbling around me. Zachary claims you prioritize your stepson's needs over his, the caseworker said. Can you respond to that? Words failed me as I tried to explain the complexities of a blended family, the effort to balance everyone's needs, the impossible task of healing wounds that seemed to deepen with every attempt to close them. That night, I called Derek, my voice breaking, as I explained the investigation. To my surprise, he came home immediately. This has gone too far, he said, his face grim. Michael and Zachary are actively trying to destroy you now. I'm not going to stand by and watch. His return and support gave me the strength to fight back. I gathered evidence of my parenting over the years, medical records showing my attentiveness to Zachary's asthma school communications, demonstrating my involvement photos and videos documenting our family life before and after the divorce. The investigation found no evidence of neglect or abuse, concluding that the asthma incident was an unfortunate accident rather than a pattern of behavior. When I called to tell Zachary the outcome, his response was chilling. The system is broken, he said. Everybody always believes the mother no matter what she does. But I know the truth, and so does Andrew. If I have to leave to get away from you, I will. The threat of my 16-year-old son running away hung over me like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment and wash away whatever was left of our family. After the CPS investigation concluded, I realized I needed professional help to process my guilt grief and the seemingly insurmountable challenges of repairing my relationship with my sons. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and began weekly sessions. You need to forgive yourself before you can expect forgiveness from others, Dr. Hayes told me during our first meeting. What you're carrying isn't just guilt about the asthma incident, but accumulated shame about your affair, your divorce, and every parenting mistake you've made. The therapy was painful, forcing me to examine my choices and their consequences without excuses. I cried through most of the early sessions, releasing years of pent-up emotions. Meanwhile, I began writing letters to Zachary, even though he wasn't speaking to me. I didn't send them at first, using them as a therapy exercise to articulate my feelings. "I failed you," I wrote in one letter. "Not just during your asthma attack, but in the months before and after. I was so focused on defending my choices that I didn't see how deeply they hurt you. I'm sorry for putting my happiness before your stability." After several weeks, I began leaving the letters in Zachary's room during his rare visits. I never mentioned them, and he never acknowledged receiving them. But occasionally, I'd notice one had been opened, giving me a fragile thread of hope. Derek and I had serious conversations about our relationship and the complex dynamics of our blended family. We agreed that we had rushed the integration process, expecting the children to adjust to massive life changes without adequate support. "I love you," Derek said one night, holding my hands across the kitchen table. "But I think we need to be more strategic about how we handle family time. Maybe we need separate spaces for a while." We made the difficult decision to temporarily live apart, Derek taking an apartment with his sons while I remained in the family home with visitation arrangements for my boys. It was a step back from our married life, but a necessary one to reduce tension. With Derek's support, I also approached Michael about his role in the ongoing conflict. The conversation was tense but productive. "I'm not asking you to speak well of me," I said during a coffee meeting. "But please stop encouraging Zachary to view me as the enemy. He's hurting, and your approval of his anger is preventing him from healing." Michael was defensive at first, but eventually acknowledged that the situation had become unhealthy for both boys. "I don't like how you handled things," he said, "but this level of hostility isn't good for anyone, especially Zachary." We established clearer boundaries about communication and agreed to consult with a family mediator to address co-parenting issues more constructively. The mediation process was challenging, but resulted in a more structured custody arrangement that everyone could respect. Michael agreed to encourage both boys to maintain their relationship with me, while I committed to being more attentive to their individual needs. The first small breakthrough came when Andrew agreed to spend full weekends at my house again. Initially cautious, he gradually returned to his more open, affectionate self. "Does Zachary know you're enjoying time with me?" I asked carefully one Saturday as we baked cookies together. Andrew nodded. "I told him I'm still mad about some stuff, but you're still my mom and I love you." "What did he say to that?" Andrew shrugged. "He said it's complicated, but he didn't tell me not to come anymore." Zachary himself remained resistant, but began agreeing to supervised visits, lunch at a restaurant or an afternoon at the park, usually with a family friend present as a buffer. These interactions were awkward conversation, limited to safe topics like school and movies, but they were contact nonetheless. We found a new family therapist specializing in blended families, and this time, I attended sessions with each son individually before attempting joint sessions. The therapist helped me understand how my actions had appeared from Zachary's perspective and suggested concrete ways to demonstrate my commitment to him. Derek and his sons gave us space during this healing period, understanding that forcing the blended family dynamic had contributed to the problems. When they did interact with my boys, it was in limited, low-pressure situations where everyone could leave if tensions rose. The true turning point came unexpectedly, nearly a year after the asthma incident. Zachary had agreed to stay for dinner at my house the first time he'd done so since the investigation. As we ate, he mentioned casually that spring allergy season was making his asthma act up. I immediately went to check his medication supply, noting that his inhaler was running low. "I'll get this refilled tomorrow," I said, writing a reminder on the kitchen whiteboard. Later that evening, as Zachary was preparing to have Michael pick him up, he began wheezing. I recognized the early signs of an attack and calmly got his inhaler sat with him as his breathing stabilized and called Michael to explain the situation. I can drive him to your place when he's feeling better. I offered, or he can stay here if he wants. To my surprise, Zachary said, "I'll stay, just for tonight." I stayed up most of the night, checking on him hourly without being intrusive. In the morning, I found him in the kitchen making toast. "How are you feeling?" I asked, maintaining a casual tone. "Better," he said, then added, "Thanks for checking on me." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. "Always?" I replied. Later that day, as Michael came to pick him up, Zachary hesitated in the doorway. "I miss you, Mom," he said so quietly I almost missed it. Before I could respond, he was gone. Those 4 words were the first crack in the wall he'd built between us. I called Dr. Hayes immediately, crying with relief that there might be a path forward. Over the following months, we built on that fragile foundation. Zachary agreed to more frequent, longer visits. We had our first honest conversation about the past, facilitated by our therapist. "I felt like I was being erased," Zachary admitted during one session. "Like you were trying to replace us with a new, better family." "I never wanted to replace you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I thought I could add to our family, not subtract from it. I handled everything wrong, and I'm so sorry." "When I couldn't breathe that day, and you didn't answer," Zachary's voice broke. "I thought I might die, and you wouldn't even know until it was too late." "That was the worst day of my life," I told him. "Not because of the investigation or the custody changes, but because I failed you when you needed me most. I'll never forgive myself for that." "I don't want you to never forgive yourself," he said, surprising me. "I just wanted you to understand how it felt." That conversation was painful but cathartic for both of us. It didn't resolve everything, but it opened a channel for honest communication that had been closed for too long. Gradually, Zachary began to see Derek and his sons as individuals, rather than symbols of what he'd lost. He would never be close with Derek, but he developed a civil relationship based on mutual respect. He and James discovered a shared interest in debate and political science, providing neutral ground for interaction. Andrew, relieved that the family tension was easing, blossomed again, no longer feeling forced to choose sides or carry messages between warring factions. The following Christmas marked a milestone, the first holiday where all family members participated without major conflict. We had a blended celebration, with Michael dropping off and picking up the boys, Derek and his sons joining for dinner, and everyone making an effort to focus on the positive. As I watched Zachary and James arguing good-naturedly about a video game, while Andrew and Tyler built a Lego set nearby, I felt a complex mix of emotions, residual sadness for the pain we'd all experienced, gratitude for the healing that had begun, and cautious hope for the future. Looking back on the journey, I recognized how naively I'd approached both my affair and the blended family integration. It'd been so focused on finding my own happiness that I'd underestimated the impact on my children, especially Zachary, who was old enough to understand the betrayal, but not mature enough to process it without support. I learned that affairs affect children in ways we can't anticipate, creating wounds that require acknowledgement before they can heal. I learned that blended families don't form through marriage certificates and moving trucks, but through patient, consistent relationship building over time. Most importantly, I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past, but building a better future on its broken pieces. My relationship with Zachary would never return to what it had been before the affair, but we could create something new, something honest and resilient, because it had survived the worst storms. The journey continues with steps forward and occasional steps back. There are still difficult days and painful memories. But we move through them together now, each of us trying to extend grace to others and to ourselves. Family, I discovered, isn't something you break once and fix permanently. It's something you build every day, choice by choice, with love, forgiveness, and the courage to face hard truths. If you've stayed with me through this story, I wonder if you've ever had to rebuild trust after a painful family breach. Has anyone in your family struggled to accept new members or changes? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and like this video if it resonated with you. Remember, even the most difficult family situations can heal with time, honest communication, and the willingness to put in the work. Thank you for listening, and I wish you peace and healing in your own family journey.